How's it going, folks? So I'm going to be responding to Jinks DeJen on Trump and the right. Recently he's put out some videos in regards to this issue, and he's been a friend of mine. In fact, one of the things that sets him apart from a lot of people on the left and the Democrats is that he's actually willing to have some good faith discussions and listen to where he might not be correct on some things, and you can generally have a pretty decent discussion with him for the most part, by and large. So I want to make a good faith response to some of the things he's been saying. Let's start off with the 2024 election. So Trump won the election, and the Republicans took a majority in the House and Senate. Now, Jinx, I understand that you are surprised by this result. I'm not. Now, I will start by saying that prior to the election, I openly admitted I did not know who was going to win this election. There are a number of factors that go into this, and sometimes you just don't know what to expect. I, however, am satisfied with the results. I'm going to disclose this right now. I voted for Trump. Actually, Trump's the only Republican president I've ever voted for. Usually, I'm voting for the Libertarian. So, with that being said, given his first term, sure, he made mistakes in his first term. That part is true. I'm not going to deny that. I do not believe Trump is perfect. Far from it. However, I think he's probably one of the better Republican candidates that the party's put out. He definitely is better than the Democrats. I generally, given my philosophy, will take a Republican over a Democrat in most cases. However, I would really like to see a candidate get out and actually start downsizing government, start doing things to promote our constitutionally protected rights, to start promoting freedom, which unfortunately we haven't had that in quite a long time. Sure, you have some people in Congress that at least claim to be pro freedom, but that's not the majority. That's not even a large portion of Congress, unfortunately. Furthermore, every time in my lifetime, well, at least in of the Republican presidents I remember, they were all called literally Hitler by mainstream media, by a number of Democrats and leftists. So, I mean, this is really nothing new. Furthermore, anyone who wants to call Republicans authoritarians, which there's a lot of authoritarianism in the Republican Party, but there's just as much, if not more, within the Democrat Party. And unfortunately, with Democrats, you can't really, for the most part, get through to them in their skull on this one. That's just basic facts. You know. So, with this being said, let's look at the previous administration. Not just what they did, but what they wanted to do, or at least claimed they wanted to do. First off, their measures with COVID were incredibly authoritarian, both in what they've done in practice and what they've wanted to do. a number of service members were kicked out of the armed forces, specifically because they did not want to take an experimental jab. A number of nurses and doctors were fired because they did not want to take an experimental jab. And this was done at the behest of the Democrat Party. So that is pretty authoritarian. And quite frankly, you want to know what most likely prompted this backlash against abortion? Well, and I've said this in the phone call before, everything the Democrats on the left did during COVID, they burned every single argument they would have for keeping abortion legal. My body, my choice, out the window. My right to choose, out the window. And it's not just, by the way, COVID, where the, by and large, pro abortion Democrats burn those arguments, and the left burn those arguments. It was with firearms too. It was with a number of things. So, yeah, and I know this wasn't you personally that advocated for it. However, if we're going on broad strokes, by and large, the left and the Democrats are openly in favor of stuff like gun control, abortion, and things of that matter. We want to talk about the possibility of Trump running a third term and wanting a third term, even though he said he isn't so far. Let's look at this. FDR. Well, FDR actually did have 4 terms. In fact, FDR is the reason why we have that constitutional amendment limiting the president to 2 terms. You see, you know this as well. I think you do anyway. When George Washington was president, he did 2 terms. He said, okay, look, this is way too much power for one person to have for so long. I'm not accepting a third term. The people at the time would have loved for him to have a third term at this point. However, George Washington, probably one of the only presidents in the United States history that could be trusted with more than 2 terms. In fact, I would trust George Washington or Thomas Jefferson or any of these other presidents with a lot more power because they actually understood that there are consequences with this. Unfortunately, we don't have George Washingtons and Thomas Jeffersons anymore in politics. And unfortunately, politics is one of those things that attracts the most authoritarian people out there. This is why you seek to limit that government with the Constitution. And I know I kind of got off the rails here a little bit. However, back on FDR. FDR said, screw what George Washington thinks. I do what I want. Screw the Constitution. I do what I want. And he amassed a lot of power into the federal government, which he should never have done. And in fact, several of his policies that got put in to the works did get rejected by the Supreme Court initially. And then he chose to stack the Supreme Court with sycophants, basically. People who would follow his policy and enforce his policy and not overrule it, not rule it as unconstitutional. That's a bad precedent. So while you are critical about Trump running for a third term or having a third term and it being in violation of the Constitution, FDR is really not the best example to be using. Ditto for the authoritarian part. True, there are certain authoritarian things that Trump has done. However, when you say Trump's an authoritarian, but I want FDR, another authoritarian, you're just saying, quite frankly, that, and I know you're not meaning to say this, or at least I hope you're not meaning to say this, but you're just saying, hey, I'm really not bothered by authoritarianism. I just want my brand of authoritarianism. I want my authoritarian in office. So you see where there's kind of an issue here. And I know you're able to probably look at this and probably take a step back and say, hey, you know what, you're right. Maybe I should rethink this. Let's go on, by the way, to the alternative to Trump, Kamala Harris. Um, this woman was very much so an authoritarian, very much so, floating the idea of passing at least gun laws through the executive branch, directly in violation of the Constitution. In fact, she doesn't care about the Constitution at all. She doesn't care about what's right or wrong at all. The evidence for this is, as a prosecutor in California, she withheld evidence in a case where the defendant faced the death penalty. She withheld exonerating evidence. She knew the guy didn't do it, but was still willing to prosecute him and convict him for a crime he didn't commit, uh, one of which carries a death sentence. Is that somebody you really want as president? You see where I'm going with this. By the way, in 2021, when Biden took the helm and the Democrats had the House and Senate, one of the bills they put through, they did had a number of unconstitutional clauses in it. One of which did away with the Electoral College, which is enshrined in Article 2 of the Constitution. Another one went against Article 3 of the Constitution by putting term limits on Supreme Court justices. They didn't want Trump's appointees or anybody friendly to Trump in there. They wanted to replace them with their sycophants. And in fact, they wanted to just arbitrarily expand the Supreme Court under Biden to 13 justices. I remember that. They're awful silent about that now for some reason. It's because, 13 Supreme Court justices, 13 districts now no longer is something they want. It now no longer makes sense now that Trump gets to pick them and not Biden. And it wouldn't matter which Republican, by the way, was in office. Um, it could be Rand Paul. It could be John McCain, even. By the way, I never liked John McCain to begin with. However, when he was running in 2008, Democrats were also acting as if he was literally Hitler. And then when he came out against people like Rand Paul and Donald Trump, all of a sudden he was a hero, or not so bad to the Democrats. Imagine that. But yes, you know, the Democrats show constantly that they have no principle with that. Oh, by the way, another argument they were claiming they needed to add 4 justices to the Supreme Court for. It was out of balance. And what they really meant was they wanted justices in a court that would rule in their favor all the time. That's what they really wanted. They don't care about what the Constitution says. This is why anytime somebody who's supposedly an originalist, or basically somebody who's going to read the text of the Constitution and rule based on that one, they get all mad about that. And yes, they do. They couldn't care about the text or the intent. So don't kid yourself. The left and the Democrats are very much so authoritarians as well. Moving on to Elon Musk, going through the Social Security administrations and other parts of the government. Yeah, there's a lot of parts of the government. There's a lot of that are pretty much waste, fraud, corruption that do need to be cleaned out. And unfortunately, you don't have enough people in Congress right now to do it. However, Trump putting a check on the parts of government he can with Elon Musk and Doge is actually not exactly a bad thing. I mean, when your complaint is having to write an email and send an email up at the end of the week naming 5 things you did as a government employee, that's perfectly reasonable. The fact of the matter is our government is bloated and inefficient. There are a lot of people in government jobs that come in just to sit there and collect a paycheck. Unfortunately, they don't really care to actually do their jobs, or they're hyper partisan. And yes, I do believe that there is at least some degree of payback from Trump on this. You know, I'm not foolish to that. However, Democrats have come in and done a lot of similar things. Democrats love to pay back their political opposition too. And the way you can tell is look at how some of the people were treated at January 6th. No, that was not an insurrection. That's an absolute lie. Sure, you did have some people get a little unruly, and had the Democrats just simply gotten the people who were unruly and had they been charged with the appropriate charges and convicted of the appropriate charges, there wouldn't be so much of an issue. Like, the guy that busted the window, if you put him up on the charges of busting the window, and that's it, you would have been fine. However, the Democrats chose not to do this. They chose to call it an election. They chose to put a whole bunch of people in prison who were just there or who, were speaking, and that's it. You want to talk about overreach? You want to talk about violating the Eighth Amendment? That right there is it. Furthermore, these people were denied speedy trials. So, you want to talk about something really authoritarian? Look at how the Democrats and some of their rhino lackeys acted during January 6th. You know, simply put, what by and large most people want, to include Republicans, would be, the appropriate charges going on groups like, and individuals and groups, I should say, like BLM and Antifa, who go riots in cities, burn stuff down, destroy people's property. And yet, these people, by and large, seems like a lot of them tend to get a pass from my observations. Sure, some of them get the appropriate charges on them, but it doesn't seem to be quite so many as the ones that walk. And when you have Congress creatures on the left raising a fist and bending a knee to these people, it does appear that they are connected to a degree. And I mean, maybe not conspiring, but at least showing preference to the rioters in BLM and Antifa. So, yes, there is a double standard to be noticed on this one. When it comes to prosecuting political opposition, Trump was prosecuted. When it was Trump, it was nobody above the law. However, on Biden's way out, Biden basically gave amnesty under the label of a pardon to a number of people. His sons read something along the lines of from 2014 to 2024, any crimes discovered or undiscovered. It's not a pardon, that's amnesty, masquerading as a pardon. Let's talk about foreign affairs, Russia and Ukraine. Yeah, that war is not our business. The only reason why certain people in the U.S. are interested in that war is because the Zelensky regime is helping out their political party through donations and support. And yes, Zelensky did go and campaign for either Biden or Harris, I can't remember which one, prior to the election. So, yeah, you know, Zelensky and the Democrats were actively working together. You really can't say the same about Trump so far because all Trump has done is say, okay, yeah, we want to withhold this funding, we want to pull ourselves out of it, and we want to negotiate for a peace. It's not taking Putin's side on this. He's just saying, okay, let's negotiate for peace. Either way, we're not going to continue to fund this effort, this war. Because guess what? This war is costing people their lives. And quite frankly, we really should not be getting involved. Again, as I say, it's the same position I have with Israel and Palestine or just about any other foreign war. If it doesn't involve us, we need to be getting the fuck out of it. Period. We have spent too much of our time and our resources getting involved in things we should not be getting involved in. So, yeah, I'm pretty pleased to Trump on that one. Some of our Western democracies, dude, these Western democracies, by and large, are running off the playbook out of 1984. Or the party's playbook out of 1984, dude. Europe, like Germany, UK, all these countries are putting people in jail over Facebook posts, calling a politician a dickhead. You want to call Trump an authoritarian when they're doing that? You know, while saying we should be friendly with that? I'm sorry, how are these Western democracies any different from Putin at this point? You know, they're very anti right to free speech. They are definitely anti right to keep and bear arms. They, their governments, by and large, many of them consume over half of the GDP. That doesn't sound like freedom to me. That sounds like the government is more totalitarian. And while it's not pure socialist, I mean, at what point do we say, okay, look, since the government controls most of the GDP now. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily call that a free state with a bunch of private property. So think about what you're saying. Canada, for example, not just a few years ago, they were cutting the bank accounts off of truckers who protested the COVID measures. Is that the mark of a free nation? I'm sorry, when did Trump ever start cutting people's bank accounts off? When did you do a thing like that? Yet, he's an authoritarian, and Trudeau and his regime is a shining beacon of freedom. Dude, and I get this. And I get that's this is what a lot of people that you trust are saying is that Trump, is a fascist, literally Hitler, going to, just destroy our freedom, just destroy that. You know, I get this, but at the same time, you should be smarter than this, dude. You should see some of this stuff for what it is, and I know you're better than that. And this is really what kind of troubles me here on this, dude. I mean, sure, Trump is putting a smacking smack on some of our supposed allies, but guess what? They need it. Just full stop. The complaints about, by the way, Elon Musk being a billionaire and having so much influence in the Trump administration. Well, guess what? This is not anything new. George Soros has had his money in a whole bunch of different local, state, and even the federal government. I mean, you want to. I've got a video on my phone of Hillary Clinton producing George Soros. You want to talk about billionaire who's influenced elections? Well, I mean, he's done so for quite some time. Well, before you even heard of Elon Musk. So why is it okay that George Soros does it, but now when Elon Musk uses his money for influence, why is that a problem? And by the way, whenever people who are more right wing brought up George Soros, it was dismissed as some sort of conspiracy theory. I'm sorry, do the Democrats, when it comes to funneling billionaire money to their interests, the Democrats are pros at that, and they've been doing it for quite a long time. They have no business pointing the finger at anyone else. And that's just plain and simple, dude. And I get you're concerned about Social Security. I understand your issue, and I would say if anybody needed SSA disability, it's you and your circumstances. We've talked on this a number of times. I agree. However, I don't think Elon Musk is targeting people like you. I think he is targeting the employees of that administration who come in, sit there, collect a paycheck. Some of the things that he supposedly found there, and I don't know if they're true or not. Again, I'd have to look into this a little bit more. I do agree with them being cut. Um, I don't know anybody, for example, who is over 125 years old. However, apparently, well, I shouldn't say apparently, however, it is rumored that he has found people over 125 years old collecting Social Security. In fact, the oldest person in the world is 122 years old. So maybe we need to find out why there are beneficiaries over the age of 125, because that money should not be going there, most likely. Most likely that's a fraudulent claim at this point, or either that or the government just didn't shut their Social Security off after they passed on. I don't know. And furthermore, when it comes to what other people are listening to, yeah, while Fox might not be the best source of information, I generally don't tend to watch Fox, uh, nor some of the other sources. But whenever I do end up getting some information from, say, Fox or CNN or stuff like that, yeah, um, each and every one of them have their own sets of agendas and bits of misinformation they'll put out. So, on one hand, you can say, oh, well, that person watches Fox and just dismiss them. But if you're sitting there watching CNN or something like that, if somebody else is sitting there watching CNN or something like that, then by that logic, they'd be easily able to be dismissed too. Because I've seen CNN on a number of times, either deliberately or unintentionally, screw information up and put out wrong information, or deliberately try to mislead people too. There are ways to deliberately mislead people without actually telling anything that's an overt lie. And I've caught some of those tricks with CNN, MSNBC, NPR, PBS, So at this point, maybe it's time to admit that they too are propaganda. Just like, say, Russia Today. I know you used an example, Russia Today as an example, which, okay, if Russia Today is an example of Putin propaganda, you know, maybe, we should think about, like, say, PBS or NPR, which are also state funded. Maybe you need to actually stop and think that there is something more to what they're putting out than just objective news. And I have no problem with that. However, while you're saying that, say, Fox or Russia Today is propaganda, you also need to recognize that probably some of the people you're getting your information from too are also propagandists. And unfortunately, I mean, I remember a while back when you sent me that video, of one person speaking, and I wish I could remember the name right now to be more specific, but you asked me what I thought about him. And as I watched this video, what he was saying, I'm like, okay, does this dude lack self awareness or critical thinking skills or what? I mean, it just with a lot of the things that he had said, it's like, dude, if you understand some of the finer details of what you just said, you should understand that you just contradicted yourself like 50 times over. And I think what the main talking point of the guy's video was is that the right wants to set up a theocratic state in the U.S. You know, so but yeah, that dude is incredibly biased, and I'm not sure if he's doing it intentionally or if he's just lacks a lot of the critical thinking skills and doesn't really care about being objective or anything, or maybe lacks objectivity. But that dude was way off. I mean, and dude, I wish, when you listen to people like that, you'd understand that they too are trying to just put a point out. They're not really as objective as they would put themselves out to be. It's one thing to have an opinion, but it's another thing to it, be dishonest about the opinion. And or I should maybe use the word dishonest. Maybe the guy truly believed what he said, but still, it's at that point would show a lack of judgment on his part. And maybe this is a large portion of the people I see on the left. So, proposals on gay marriage bans. You have what, 9 states that are proposing this? Well, hey, you know what? Just proposals, 9 states. And I'm not saying this is good. However, it's not to the degree that our right to keep and bear arms has been infringed by any stretch. You know, she, even though I've gone through the proper paperwork, and got it cleared from the federal government, both the rifle and the suppressor, the SBR and the suppressor, I still, no matter how much I want, can legally take this to say Colorado, California, New York. And I guarantee you the penalties for me doing it are a lot more stringent than, what you would get for gay marriage should any of those proposals succeed in those states. Um, I mean, even our anti-sodomy laws, I don't even think the penalties were so bad as, say, what would have happened to me if, say, I didn't go through the proper process to get these items legally. Which, by the way, the process took damn near 2 years for me to get this built. And had I decided, screw it, I'm just going to do it illegally, well, the penalties on this: 10 years, $250,000 fine max. 10 years, $250,000 fine max. By the way, that was FDR that did that. Just so you know. Another reason why I do not like FDR. So, I hopefully I put enough information out there and enough food for thought out there for you to listen to. I want you to take a step back, calm down, take a deep breath, and realize that while Trump has some authoritarian tendencies, he's not the only one. And some of the people who you would have preferred are just as bad, if not worse, than Trump. I would put FDR as worse than Trump. I would put Kamala Harris as worse than Trump. Sorry, dude. And unfortunately, I would love to see us get back to actually enforcing the Constitution, the rule of law, and having some respect for people's rights, having respect for people's freedom again. However, I don't foresee us voting our way out of this. I don't foresee us getting to that point, save a major cultural change. And it's not just with the right that needs to change, it is the left too. there are a lot of authoritarian leftists. Take, for example, the people complaining about Roe v. Wade being overturned. By the way, Roe v. Wade should have been overturned. The justices that ruled on Roe v. Wade were not doing so within the bounds of the Constitution. They were just making the law up as they went. Now, when it comes to abortion, you want people to respect your rights on abortion. Unfortunately, you got to show some. Well, I shouldn't say unfortunately. Fact of the matter is, you should probably show some respect on other liberties. But you talk to the average person who was upset about, say, the Texas abortion law. Well, they're the same people who think we should still keep the laws on the books that got Randy Weaver's wife and son killed by the federal government. These are the same people who think that our gun laws just do not go far enough. And I'm sorry, I do not feel any sympathy for those people when they complain about, say, my home state of Texas putting a very prohibitive abortion law on the books. I just don't feel for those people at this point. They can't respect other people's rights. Why should anybody respect the rights that they happen to value? So, yes, if you want the culture to change, if you want us to get to a society where we value freedom more, we want to be more libertarian. Unfortunately, a lot of people's culture has to change, and the problem isn't solely on the right. It's not even the majority of the right. It's a large portion of leftists that refuse to respect rights that they don't happen to value or worse happen to hate. So I'm going to leave this at this, man. All right, y'all take her easy out there and have a great day.